Witchfire's Galleon update introduced two dungeons, one on the Scarlet Coast and another in Irongate Castle. These are tailored challenges designed to put the best prayers to the test. In this video, I'll run through what to expect in both dungeons, how to access them, and run you through start to finish what they have to offer. Chapter markers if you want to skip ahead to Irongate, which is the more complex of the two. Scarlet Coast, this is the first dungeon you'll likely come across. To access it, you'll need a Gnosis level of 3 and 20k Witchfire, meaning you can't jump into this dungeon without killing the familiar in the Scarlet Coast and engaging in the game for a while, as you'll need to complete a number of tasks before you increase your level. The dungeon is quite short, but it is non-stop action from start to finish. Both dungeons have a timer, and you must complete the dungeon within this. For Scarlet Coast, this is 8 minutes, which might not sound like a lot of time, and does require you to keep moving. Starting out, you enter into a cave, which introduces you to this dungeon's main mechanics, which is the poison plant traps you'll find throughout, and that the enemies within alternate between being invulnerable and vulnerable. Let's focus on why enemies fluctuate in and out of invulnerability. This is one of the dungeon's main mechanics, and it's these effigies here that give them this buff. This presents you with two options. Either take measured shots when your enemies are vulnerable, or rush in to take out the effigy. The challenge with rushing in is that the first effigy is located behind a rock early on, so you need to get deep in to kill it, which can spawn the next group of enemies. I tried both strategies, and I found if I ran forward, I'd generally be hit by some attacks and get slightly overwhelmed, whereas sitting back generally worked well, as you're fighting some melee cultists and husk archers whose projectiles are easy to dodge. The poison plants within the location are there to limit your play space and movement, making rushing forward even more challenging, as you're heavily limited in how far you can move. They don't affect the enemies in any way, so they will gladly hide in them, requiring you to take them out at range. This isn't much of a problem, as the dungeon is quite small, so most of your weapons will have effective range, as there aren't many long sight lines. You can disable the poison plants by interacting with these skull plants near them. Like disarming anything, that requires you to stand still, holding F, so again, best to kill the enemies before attempting this. Getting further in, and into the second section of the dungeon, you're faced with an upper and lower portion. The upper level is filled with poison plants, so you can only disarm from the other side, and at the other end is also another effigy providing invulnerability to enemies. On the lower level, you'll also come across the small mines that will decay you over time. These you can quickly pop with some clear shots to clear the area. They are all over, so be careful fighting down there if you haven't cleared them out. Again, you're faced with the choice of rushing forward to destroy the effigy, or sitting back. Rushing forward can see you overwhelmed again. I had no real trouble sitting back and again, dodging between periods of invulnerability. The enemies are generally some ranged musketeers who can sit on the upper level, and husks and assassins on the lower to try and take focus. You can retreat to the first area if you're overwhelmed, which is why you should always disable those plants before moving forward. Retreating back will give you some breathing room if the musketeer is acting normally and taking shots from above. Then once you've killed some or all of the enemies, taking out the effigy. It's worth mentioning, it's the effigies of Plague that provide the invulnerability, not the effigies of Rot, which provide other buffs that you'll see around the arena. The Plague effigy in the second section is located at the back of the upper, meaning you'll need to go down the bottom and loop back up to get at it. Located next to it is also the ability to disarm the poison plants in that area. After finishing these off, you're then fighting some cultist archers and a grenadier on the top level. They will spawn effigies of Scab to buff them, but they're all easily taken out. Within the dungeon there are 2 ammo chests, so you don't have to worry about watching your shots, as you'll be given plenty of ammo, just make sure you enter with a healthy stock. After clearing the cultists, your last ammo supply is on the right, and so is the plant to disarm the poison flowers in the boss arena. You need to disarm these, don't skip it. I think this plant is here to ensure that you can't rush straight to the boss. Disarming this plant would be hard with enemies present, so I would suggest killing everything, not just rushing through. On disarming the plants, you're up to the boss, which is basically a buffed up devotee. They're not much of a challenge. I actually ran this a couple of times to completion because my first time it got stuck flying in a corner, and it kept doing the same here. I find the devotees need a bit of an AI update. It can be a little anticlimactic. While fighting the boss, other devotees can also spawn. If yours aren't bugged, your best bet is to use a rifle with some range and keep to the opposite side of the arena. Devotees fly fairly passively until you get close to them, which can cause them to do a drop attack or a small bombing run with decaying mines. So keeping distance will see you fairly well set up. Fired up woodsmen will spawn and rush you throughout the match. I found these were easy to take out with a ricochet rifle, and I'd then swap to hypnosis for powered up crits on the boss. There's no special mechanics in this room, so that's basically the end of it. If you haven't disarmed the plants, the arena is largely covered in them, making movement very challenging, so it's really important to do that. You get a couple of chests of completion and you can exit out the back. Alrighty, let's jump into Irongate Castle. This one kicked my ass for a while, and definitely takes more getting used to. The dungeon is quite cramped and has some unique mechanics throughout, and again plays heavily on your positioning and situational awareness. You'll need a Gnosis level of 4 for this one, meaning you need to have beaten the areas familiar and met the other criteria. You'll also need 30k Witchfire to open the door. These Witchfire costs, by the way, are one-time costs, so once you've paid it, you can run the dungeon as much as you want. This dungeon is located here in Irongate Castle. It can take some time to get to it, and often enemies can spawn just outside the entrance, so you'll need to make sure you clear those out first. This dungeon has a 15-minute timer, so let's dive in. On entrance, you'll be charged by a bunch of revenants. They're not too challenging. Once again, I'll advocate for the ricochet rifle here. You can tag and take out multiple enemies at a time. The hypnosis rifle was also able to one-shot most of the enemies without a charge slot at this point, so options are pretty open. Now this is a bit to pay attention to. As one of the dungeon's main mechanics, when an enemy dies, an orb appears on their corpse, and after 1 to 2 seconds it begins floating slowly towards the lanterns. Throughout the dungeon, any enemy you kill will spawn one of these orbs, which will float to lanterns scattered throughout. This serves two purposes. First up, filling a lantern by killing all enemies in the section will spawn some ammo or an elixir. But secondly, these floating orbs will damage you, and they will damage you heavily. So you not only need to pay attention to the enemies and their positions while they're alive, but also the positions of their death, and where those orbs likely are as they float around the arena. They will always float straight to the nearest lantern, but be mindful of these as they will chunk you down. As we step further in, we see the dungeon is filled with lightning and fire traps. These you can dash past. Fire traps are pretty easy to avoid. Lightning I often get caught by. The starting traps are hard to disarm, but as we go you can sneak up to them to disarm them if you get flushed with the wall. Past those revenants and traps are two blunderbusses. These are large enemies with a big gun and bigger shield. The two strats I found most helpful were jumping in on top of them and using freezing spells to hold them in place while shooting them down, or shooting them with a rifle from range. If you hit the arm holding the gun, you can slowly chip them down while popping in and out of cover, and the hypnosis rifle will stagger them slightly. After taking them both out, you'll need to loot this body here, which will give you a key that opens the gate directly to your right, which starts the next section. In here, you'll find you're slowed. This is caused by the totems of clots, which are small little icicle style totems. On opening the gate, I'd suggest dashing forward and getting around this right side of the rock to be able to disarm this one. The slow is incredibly taxing and prevents you dodging most attacks from the incoming enemies. If you can disarm this quickly enough, you can briefly step back before the enemies arrive. We fight some more fired up woodsmen that I now see are called Screechers, and they'll rush you 3 at a time in 3 different waves. I'll call out again the ricochet rifle here. It was able to easily take them out. Watch out for their death explosions and again, the orbs that will travel to the lantern near the gate's entrance. At the end of the hall are 2 handgunners. They don't move up, so you can kill the Screechers near the entrance with no trouble, and then start working on these after. You should be familiar with this enemy if you're in this dungeon as they spawn throughout Irongate, but they are an enemy that will stop and heal with a bubble shield after taking enough damage. I generally found the best option was to try and put one of them into this heal animation, rush forward, freeze the healthy one while taking out the weaker. One-on-one they aren't too challenging, but they can be difficult to take down if one is taking shots while the other heals. It's best to approach them from the right side of the arena, as there is a lightning trap on the left wall that will shoot you as you go past. These lightning traps also disable your spells. After taking them out, the next key can be found at a body beside them. This will also spawn revenants and wretches back down the hall where we entered. The wretches can fire homing ice shots, so try to be mindful of your positioning, as these can do decent chunks of damage. I would suggest disarming the lightning trap as well from earlier, as we do need to come back this way. Now we backtrack to where we killed the blunderbusses, and once back in that room you want to go to the opposite side and open the gate. Hugging the left wall we can disable this trap, and stepping forward will spawn 3 swordsmen to your left, which should be easy to take out. They'll rush you so you can step back if you need to. Watch out for their death orbs again, always the orbs. This room is again filled with totems of clot that slow you. One is immediately ahead as you enter behind the stone. The others can largely be seen up ahead. They can be shot to kill them, but it takes quite a few bullets. After clearing the swordsman, I'd move slowly through to clear them out as best you can. As you move forward, you will spawn some wretches at the end of the hall and some axemen. Kite the axemen backwards and take them out so you can focus on taking shots at the wretches. The wretches will fire again, ice homing shots at you, so it's good to fight them separately if you can. There are additional bodies in the arena that I should mention that can drop health and ammo kits. These act like the ammo chests from the first dungeon, and I found I was always well stocked in ammo and generally health items in this dungeon. It almost felt a little too generous at times. Now in my run, I spawn a calamity here, which is a good thing to mention. While in dungeons, calamities can still spawn. These can be simple, like the one here that only needed me to kill some revenants, But I'd had Phantom spawn on me in the upcoming boss, which ended a different run of mine. And I've also had the Galleon spawn, which is impossible to kill while inside both dungeons. It can be a real pain, and given the runs are timed, a challenging calamity can put an end to your attempt. This is something I hope they tweak. I'm fine with calamities appearing while I'm in a dungeon, but the Galleon, I believe only calamities that can be completed should be allowed to spawn. Again, as we move up, watch for traps. There is a lightning trap against one of the center rocks, which will shock you as you go by, and the key is at the end of the room behind the wretches. On getting that key, pick up the ammo and any health orbs you haven't already got, and we head towards the boss. As you leave back to the Blunderbuster center room, some screeches will spawn, only 3 to 4, so nothing too challenging. Remember the lanterns drop loot, so check those you've done previously if you're low on health or ammo. With this new key, we head back to where we fought the handgunners, and open the final door. There are 2 more bodies to loot in this room, so check them if you're short on anything as you're about to enter the boss. This boss was a nightmare my first few times. You're fighting 2 warrior priests in this room, and never-ending waves of revenants. The challenge with this room is that both priests, which are the boss of this dungeon, are invulnerable, and remain in that state for quite some time. It's not super clear, as it's not used earlier in the dungeon to my knowledge, but both will remain invulnerable until the 2 lanterns in the room have been filled with orbs from the killed revenants. This fight essentially boils down to avoiding the priests until you can damage them. 1 lantern is at the entrance, the other is to the far right of the room from where you started. In the center of the room is a pillar type thing you can stand on, and there is a fetish there called Monk's Hood. Now, this boss fight is a pain. The invincible priests will fire homing missiles at you and spawn ghosts of them spells that melee attack. The ghosts aren't too hard. See one and dodge away, and you're pretty solid. The homing missiles are a bit of a nightmare. They both shoot around 4 to 5 at a time, and they're staggered, so a single dodge won't avoid them all. They also move around terrain fairly reliably. I found that hugging the center pillar while on the opposite side to the priests, while not flawless, often allowed me to avoid most of the homing missiles. You just need to keep an eye out for the revenants who may use a jumping attack to reach you. I'm sounding a bit like a broken record, and there may be better strategies, but again the ricochet rifle was great here for killing the revenants. I'll also mention now that I was using the ice, light, and heavy spell. The heavy spell that forms a sphere can be a great oh shit button, as it negates the incoming projectiles while freezing enemies who come too close to the orb. I generally use my spells as utility to give me more space or keep me alive rather than the damaging alternatives, but your playstyle might differ. On killing enough revenants and filling the lanterns, which can be seen when they change colour and drop loot, the priests become killable. I'd saved most of my demonic ammo, so I was able to make short work of both at this point. For most of my runs, the priests would stay where they spawned, if I didn't approach them. As you enter the arena, run to the right and stay in the back right of that space, away from the priests. The revenants will come to you, and the priests shouldn't come around. And this is honestly where we come to the end of the Iron Gate dungeon. I hope this video has helped you out. I know the Iron Gate dungeon invulnerability mechanic left me scratching my head for ages. I'd like to see that be a little more obvious in the future, but I did enjoy needing to work it out over time. What do you think of these dungeons if you've beaten them, or working at it? Do you think they're too tough, just right, or do you think they need some tweaks? Let me know in the comments. Thanks so much for checking out this video. If it helped you out, leave me a like, subscribe for more, and I'll catch you down there. See you later.